Right now, if you look around the planet, there's only one kind of human walking the Earth, you and me, Homo sapiens. But for most of our species' history, that wasn't the case. We once shared this planet with other human species, close relatives who looked like us, lived like us, and, in some cases, were barely distinguishable from us. These were the Neanderthals, the Denisovans, Homo floresiensis, and others we're still learning about. But here's the big question: what happened to them? Why are we the only ones left? Today, we're going on a journey through time, hundreds of thousands of years ago, to understand the rise and fall of humanity's closest relatives, and how their story is still part of ours. Let's start by meeting some of these ancient humans. The first thing to understand is that Homo sapiens are part of a much larger family called the genus Homo. We evolved from earlier hominins in Africa, and over time, different human species branched out in different directions, both literally and evolutionarily. One of the most well-known of these relatives is the Neanderthal, or Homo neanderthalensis. They appeared around 400,000 years ago and lived primarily in Europe and Western Asia. Contrary to the old stereotype of them being brutish or dumb, Neanderthals were actually quite advanced. They made complex tools, controlled fire, wore clothing, hunted large animals, and even buried their dead. There's even evidence they might have created symbolic art and music. Then we have the Denisovans, a mysterious group that lived in Asia. We didn't even know they existed until 2010, when scientists analyzed DNA from a single finger bone found in Denisova cave in Siberia. That DNA was distinct from both Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, revealing a whole new branch of humanity. We still don't know exactly what Denisovans looked like because we've found so few of their remains, but genetically, they left a clear mark. Another relative was Homo floresiensis, discovered in 2003 on the Indonesian island of Flores. These humans were tiny, about 3.5 feet tall, and are often nicknamed hobbits. They lived until about 50,000 years ago and had stone tools, hunted, and likely lived in small groups. Their small size may have been an adaptation to island life, a phenomenon called island dwarfism. And then there's Homo erectus, one of our oldest ancestors, who lived for almost 2 million years and spread from Africa into Asia. While they're more ancient than Neanderthals or Denisovans, they were still around in some regions when early Homo sapiens began to appear. Now, here's where things get interesting. Around 300,000 years ago, Homo sapiens evolved in Africa. For a long time, we stayed there. But around 70,000 years ago, something changed. Groups of Homo sapiens began migrating out of Africa in waves, moving into the Middle East, Asia, and eventually Europe and Australia. As our ancestors moved into new territories, they encountered these other human species. And they didn't just pass by them, they interacted. We know from genetic evidence that Neanderthals and Homo sapiens interbred. In fact, if you have ancestry from outside of Africa, you probably have about 1 to 2% Neanderthal DNA. Similarly, people from parts of Asia and Oceania carry Denisovan DNA, sometimes up to 5 or 6% in certain populations like indigenous Australians and Papuans. These interactions weren't always peaceful, of course. We don't know exactly how these meetings played out, whether they were marked by cooperation, conflict, or a mix of both. But the key point is that Homo sapiens didn't just replace other humans. We absorbed some of them genetically, even as their distinct species disappeared. So why did these other human species vanish? There isn't one simple answer. It was likely a combination of climate change, competition, and genetic absorption. Let's start with the environment. Between 50,000 and 30,000 years ago, the world experienced major climate shifts, including ice age conditions that dramatically changed ecosystems. As glaciers advanced and retreated, animal migrations shifted, forests gave way to tundra, and food sources became unpredictable. Neanderthals, for example, were well adapted to cold environments, but rapid shifts in climate could have strained their survival. Next, consider competition. As Homo sapiens populations expanded, we likely competed with Neanderthals and Denisovans for food, shelter, and territory. Our species seems to have had certain advantages, possibly more efficient tools, broader social networks, or more flexible hunting strategies. We might have had more advanced language, which allowed for better coordination. Over time, these small advantages could have added up. It's also possible that direct conflict occurred, though we have limited archaeological evidence for large-scale warfare at that time. What's more likely is that as Homo sapiens moved into new regions, the sheer pressure of numbers, more people, more children, more groups, slowly displaced the smaller, more isolated populations of Neanderthals and Denisovans. And then there's genetic absorption. Interbreeding didn't just leave a trace, it may have contributed to the disappearance of distinct species. As Neanderthals and Denisovans interbred with Homo sapiens, their populations may have been slowly absorbed into ours, losing their separate identity over generations. By about 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals were extinct. Denisovans likely followed soon after, though we don't have precise dates. Homo floresiensis disappeared roughly 50,000 years ago, and by 10,000 years ago, we, the Homo sapiens, were the last humans left. But here's what's amazing. Our ancient relatives aren't entirely gone. They left a legacy inside us. Today, modern genetic testing can reveal not only your ancestry, but also how much Neanderthal or Denisovan DNA you carry. These ancient genes may influence a variety of traits. Some Neanderthal DNA is linked to how our immune system responds to diseases. Other genes may affect skin and hair characteristics, and even how we respond to sunlight. In Tibetan populations, Denisovan DNA seems to help people live at high altitudes, allowing for more efficient oxygen use, a vital adaptation for life in the Himalayas. So when we talk about the extinction of these species, it's important to remember they didn't vanish without a trace. Their DNA lives on in billions of people today, shaping us in subtle but real ways, and we're still uncovering new chapters of this story. In recent years, scientists discovered Homo luzonensis in the Philippines, a human species previously unknown, identified from fossilized teeth and bones. Every year, new tools in archaeology and genetics reveal more about the complex web of human evolution. We used to think of human history as a straight line, one species evolving into another. Now, we know it was more like a tangled tree, with branches crossing, merging, and sometimes dying out. Now, before we wrap up, let's zoom out for a moment. We've been talking about our closest human ancestors, but what about our closest living relatives? The ones still swinging through forests, thumping chests, and occasionally throwing things at researchers? We share the planet today with other primates, chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, and orangutans, and they're all part of our extended family. If you go back far enough, about 6 to 7 million years ago, you'd find a common ancestor we shared with chimpanzees and bonobos. These two species are our closest living relatives, sharing about 98.7% of our DNA. That's closer than mice are to rats. Gorillas are next in line, with about 98.4% shared DNA, and orangutans a bit further out at 97%. Now, these similarities aren't just numbers, they show up in behavior, emotions, tool use, and even social structures. Chimpanzees have been observed using sticks to fish for termites, crafting spears to hunt small animals, and forming complex alliances, sometimes for cooperation, and sometimes for power struggles. Sound familiar? But despite these similarities, the evolutionary path that led to modern humans split off from these other apes millions of years ago. Since then, we've evolved in different environments, developed language, culture, and technology, while they've adapted to life in forests and jungles. Unfortunately, many of these species are now endangered due to habitat loss, poaching, and climate change. So in a way, our closest relatives, both extinct and living, are reminders of our place in the natural world and our responsibility to protect it. So, what happened to Homo sapiens' closest ancestors? The extinct ones live on in our DNA, in the tools they left behind, and in the questions we still ask about them. The living ones, our primate cousins, offer a glimpse into the deep shared roots of intelligence, emotion, and social life. In the end, we're not just the last human species, we're one small branch of a vast family tree, shaped by time, survival, and connection. Their story is our story. Thanks for joining me. If you enjoyed this dive into our ancient and living relatives, hit like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time for more journeys into our human past.